We're continuing with Chapter 35 of Burying the Boys, the CIA, the Mob, and America's Secret History by Daniel Hopsicker. Don't shoot, I'm with Trinity Energy. After the raucous partying on Fat Tuesday, the final day and night of Mardi Gras revelry in New Orleans, the morning after Ash Wednesday was a quiet one in popular West Bank, Carlos Marcello County steakhouse, Del Frisco's, in February of 1985. A sign on the front door said the restaurant was closed, and raging the steakhouse's proprietor, 45-year-old Dale Wamstad, aka Del Frisco Wamstad, strode angrily across the darkened main dining room. Accounts vary on what happened next, but all agree that when the smoke had cleared, Dale Wamstad had been shot 3 times at point-blank range by his wife Lena. I went inside and asked someone why the restaurant was closed, Wamstad testified at the trial of his wife. Then I looked at the bar, and Lena was sitting on a stool. I asked her why the restaurant was closed. Then Lena reached in her pocket of her sweater, and instantly I knew the restaurant was closed, and the workers had been sent home. I threw my hands up and said, don't, Lena. Being in court the day of Wamstad's trial had obviously been great theater. I saw the blue flame from the gun. Wamstad continued to a hushed courtroom at Lena's trial for attempted murder. I felt the bullet hit me in the jaw. I turned and tried to dive behind the bar. She shot me 2 more times in the back. I fell to my knees and crawled toward the bar on my stomach. Lena was hysterical, screaming, pointing the gun at me, but I can't say I heard the trigger clicking anymore. We found someone who remembered the shooting well. I was on the phone with Lena when she shot him, said a longtime business associate of Dale Wamstad's Houston restaurateur, Risa Kelly. When Lena dropped the phone to shoot him, I heard the shots and the commotion. When she picked it back up, I asked her, Lena, did you just shoot Dale? Yeah, I shot the bastard, Lena told me, but it was a really little gun. He'll live. Lena had pumped 3 .25 caliber slugs into Dale Wamstad's imposing 6'2", 240-pound bulk in the dining room of Del Frisco's restaurant. Just a case of point Mardi Gras blues? Not according to dozens of witnesses who testified on Lena's behalf. They characterized steakhouse owner Dale as a raging bull who could go from being calm to violent, abusive rages at the snap of a finger. Witnesses described numerous occasions on which he had physically abused his wife. Even their only child, Roy, told of a reign of family terror as well. Once on Father's Day, my mom gave my dad a pencil sharpener for a present, and he threw it at her in the car and called her a bitch and a whore, and was driving and hitting her, and I held up my arms to separate them all the way from Gulf Point, Mississippi to New Orleans. In his defense, Wamstad said in a statement to police that he didn't beat his wife any more than any other husband. Ouch. In a courtroom packed with supporters who cheered the verdict, Lena Wamstad was acquitted. Why is any of this of interest to us? Because the Wamstads are listed together as the officers and incorporators in a company also called Trinity Energy, filed in Louisiana during the eventful year of 1981. Talk about a hall of mirrors. As the 80s progressed, Dale Wamstad became one of America's most successful restaurant entrepreneurs, we learned, eventually selling his Del Frisco's steakhouse chain for $22 million in 1995. Wait a minute. We thought, when we read this, Michael Fogler's Trinity Energy had also sold for $22 million in 1995. Was this just more coincidence? We detected some strong similarities between Wamstad's career and that of another fantastically successful steakhouse chain operator, convicted drug kingpin and Bill Clinton intimate Dan Lassiter. Could the steakhouse chains be a convenient money laundering vehicle? Would we be able to connect the dots and conclusively prove that Lieutenant Commander Al Martin had been right about Trinity Energy? Lena and Dale's Trinity Energy had first been incorporated not in Catholic Louisiana, but instead in redneck Baptist Mississippi, where one might expect the theological niceties involved in the concept of a tripartite deity to be of far less interest than snake handling during Monday night revivals. Wamstad denied any critical code involving in Wamstad denied any secret code involved in naming his oil company Trinity. I'm just a Catholic boy, and the Trinity is drilled into all Catholics, he protested. Dale Wamstad had never been to church in his life, scoffed sharpshooter Lena, his ex-wife. We found her dealing blackjack in a Mississippi Gulf Coast casino. Dale confessed that he had no experience or even interest in the oil drilling industry. Why then, we asked him, had he operated a restaurant chain under the corporate name of an oil company? Wamstad asserted that in a free country one could name one's company anything one damn well pleased. Driving home Mr. Wamstad's point, we received a phone call from Mr. Wamstad's attorney, Houston Oppenheimer in Louisiana, Kentucky, home of the company, offering to sue. Among the achievements we were to learn, Mr. Oppenheimer represents International Gaming Management Incorporated, a casino company with ownership links to one of New York's major mafia families, according to federal affidavits, and a company involved in a major video poker political scandal in Louisiana in the mid-1990s. Small world. As might be expected of someone who shot her husband 3 times, twice in the back, Lena Wamstad today is still attractive, blonde in her early 50s, was only too happy to fill us in on the turbulent history of Dale Wamstad. Wamstad, she told us, moved to Louisiana with his family while a teenager from Spokane, Washington. Lena remembers receiving early indications that he was somehow connected. Like the young Barry Seal, Wamstad had somehow excited the interest of the FBI back in the early 1960s in New Orleans. While we were still basically newlyweds, Dale did something really strange one time, Lena said. He packed a suitcase with maternity clothes. I was pregnant at the time and left in a hurry, telling me he was helping the FBI track somebody down. Later, when he was arrested for stealing a rental car that same year, 1962, he told me, "Honey, don't worry. I took the car on orders from the FBI. I thought he was lying until at his trial 2 men in black suits and skinny ties came over to me in the courtroom, said they were FBI agents, and that everything would be all right." Dale also spent a lot of early 60s time at the New Orleans Fairgrounds, Lena told us, as had the mob's brother McLaney, who've we've seen are implicated in the Kennedy assassination. There are rumors that Dale was a bookie, Lena said, which eventually resulted in being investigated for bookmaking. We pressed her for more details about this time and place, the early 60s in New Orleans, so important to subsequent American history. Once she offered, when we broke up for a few weeks, Dale lived in the town and country motel. Of course, it was Mafia kingpin Carlos Marcello who had owned the town and country. His headquarters was there as well. Wamstad called us in a panic one evening after discovering the fact that newsmen, we weren't alone, were nosing into his beginnings. He denied the story completely and denied as well after a long pause ever knowing Carlos Marcello. What was the long pause for, we asked. Because I had to think, he told us. I did know Carlos' 2 brothers, both of whom came into the restaurant a lot. Lena Wamstad has an interesting background, too, filled with New Orleans mob connections. One of her uncles had been a lightweight prize fighter, Angelo Conforto, and both he and a second uncle, Jerome Conforto, had both owned a lot of places on Bourbon Street, including the famous Papa Joe's, a busy little bar on Bourbon Street that didn't close until 4 or 5 o'clock in the morning, as well as the Silver Slipper, a notorious Marcello hangout. I notice you've been sniffing around the New Orleans Confrontes, wrote a friend who had been following our progress. You might be interested in the fact that Jada was the stage name for a stripper from New Orleans who was Jack Ruby's girlfriend, and whose real name was Janet Conforto. Janet, or Jada Conforto, we discovered was Lena Wamstad's aunt, and Lena's aunt Jada had a secret. On the morning of the Kennedy assassination in Dallas, we learned that Jada Conforto had been in such a panic to leave Dallas that she ran over a pedestrian with her white Cadillac convertible, telling the traffic cop taking a report to please just hurry up and call someone in Ruby's office to fix things because there was something extremely urgent she had to do. She had to get out of town. In the days leading up to November 22nd, 1963, Jack Ruby was handing out an 8x10 glossies of Jada to whoever would take one. We learned there were hundreds of said glossies in the trunk of his car when arrested. Jada was to be the star headliner the weekend Kennedy was murdered. Dallas police documents clearly indicate that Jada was intent on getting the fuck out of Dodge at the very time she should have been opening at the carousel. Can you say foreknowledge? We know you could. In a letter to the head of the Dallas Criminal Investigation Division, Assistant Chief of Police Batchelor related how a local man had been hit by a woman fleeing Dallas in a hurry at 10:30 a.m. the morning of the assassination. Jada Conforto, driving her white Cadillac convertible with Louisiana plates, stopped just long enough to phone for someone in Jack Ruby's office to pick up the slightly injured pedestrian and take him to a hospital. She told the cop filling out the report, Let's get this over with. I'm in a hurry to get to New Orleans." The letter, though basically just an inter-office communication from one cop to another, still gave the appearance of being filled with coded references. Though Jada was a well-known headlining stripper for Jack Ruby, all the letter would say was the woman gave the appearance of being in show business. What the letter states next cannot be mistaken for anything other than studied indifference. It is unknown if this has any significance in the Oswald case. Ruby's girlfriend flees Dallas the day of the assassination, and it didn't even make the papers. A young student working at a Dallas health spa had told police both that he had seen Ruby with Lee Harvey Oswald, and he had been given cards advertising Jada's appearance. But the cops poo-pooed the report stating that the student wasn't as busy as he says he is. 2 days before the assassination, Ruby was passing out cards hawking Jada's appearance at the Dallas District Attorney's office. There he introduced himself to the assistant Dallas DA, Ben Ellis, telling him, "You probably don't know me now, but you will." Telling in a recently released analysis, the FBI still characterizes Ruby as a small-time operator who was never able to cultivate friendships with important figures or organized crime. "You never rat out your friends," we phoned Lena Wamstad to ask if she could get us an interview with Aunt Jada. "Jada's dead," Lena told us. "She was killed during the House Select Committee Kennedy assassination investigation in a motorcycle accident. My sister and Kenner told me a few years later that Jada had been murdered because she knew too much." On a whim, we asked where she and Dale Wamstad had been when Kennedy was killed. After all, everybody remembers where they were when Kennedy was killed except George Bush, Richard Nixon, Howard Hunt, and Felix Rodriguez. "We were on our way to a big party that night," Lena said. "I was on a streetcar on Canal Street, shopping for a new dress to wear to the party, when I heard the news. I turned around and went home, and didn't have the heart to go to the party. Dale went, though. Had this been the big post-acquittal bash Carlos Marcello held after being found not guilty of federal charges that same day? Too much time has passed, Lena said. She couldn't remember. Once again, we were reminded of John Kennedy Jr.'s quote, "Time is the great enemy of the truth." Jada was a stripper, but her niece Lena will own an oil company, and even if it was used for money laundering, that is the very definition of American upward mobility. Details of Lena's life with Wamstead included frequent moves. They lived in 20 different houses in their time together, and strange skills. After he had broken into a safe at his place of employment, Dale boasted to Lena that he knew how to beat a lie detector test should investigators come calling. Wamstead grew increasingly affluent in the 1970s, owning a plush spread called Oak Lawn Plantation outside Pass Christian, Mississippi, where Dale supposedly plugged away as an insurance agent. Then the Wamsteads divorced in 1978 for several years. During the interim, Dale left the country, sailing to Dutch Guyana in South America for a year on a shrimping vessel called Nothing Fancy. When he returned, he had discovered his true calling in life. He said, "I'm going into the restaurant business. It's my destiny." Had Mr. Wamstead's destiny been sealed by something that occurred during his shrimping sojourn to South America? He denied it. "I had a crazy idea that a lot of folks in New Orleans had of going to South America and striking it rich," he said. "We took a special 35-foot shrimp boat that Halter Marine had developed down in Paraibo, Dutch Guyana, and the very first time we dropped a line, the boat went underwater, and I ended up selling it to some Dutchman down there for 50 $100 bills, which I used to open my first restaurant when we got back." Contradicting this story is the fact that Nothing Fancy sits at anchor today in Biloxi, Mississippi, in a marina outside the Grand Casino. Wamstead's voice carried such sincerity that we didn't have the heart to tell him that we already knew that Halter Marine had been and was still owned by a company called, can you guess, Trinity Marine Group, itself owned by the huge Dallas Bass Brothers controlled Trinity Industries, and that Halter Marine, at the same time Wamstead was manning one of the company's ships, had purchased the cigarette boat company in Miami belonging to George Bush's good friend Don Arano, which were the favorite of drug smugglers to offload their contraband from the motherships. Could this be recent secret history? Offshore supply vessels are a favored method of bringing drugs to shore, according to law enforcement authorities, and while the 1980s oil bust had devastated most of the Gulf offshore supply vessel business, the Trinity Marine Group had grown fat, buying the mom and pops going under all around them at fire sale prices. They were also big beneficiaries of Louisiana's new authorizing riverboat gambling, designing and building huge 3,000 passenger stern wheel gambling riverboats, like the $30 million 350-foot long Queen of New Orleans, to carry roulette wheels and blackjack tables on the Big Muddy. At the same time this was happening, the Lucky Company's military business grew by leaps and bounds, with some $100 million in military contracts coming to account for 70 to 75% of its activities. Imagine that. Wamstead's first Del Frisco's Steakhouse opened in 1980 in Louisiana, Kentucky, home of the company and Jimmy Lambert. The money went to Louisville, Longtime Wamstead associate Risa Kelly told us. It went to a man named Inez Mather from the famous Mather family up there in horse country. They're like the Cornelius or the Whitneys or the Vanderbilts. Inns, Inns Mather was my CPA, Wamstead reported angrily. All I know about him is that he has a son who's a first-rate tennis player there in Louisville. Like Arkansas's Chicken King Don Tyson, there have long been rumors in law enforcement that Popeye's chicken founder, Al Copeland, had made himself a killing in the drug trade at the exact same time Barry Seal was creating for somebody enormous wealth. In addition to Popeye's chicken, Copeland was perhaps unsurprisingly the proud owner of the fastest offshore powerboat in the known world, birthed naturally in Miami. And Dale Wamstead, we discovered, had been in the restaurant business with Al Copeland. Dale owned the franchise for Popeye's restaurants in Mississippi's Gulf Coast, said Lena Wamstead, but his very first Popeye's was in Louisville. Wamstead admitted this was true, but Al Copeland taught me was the meaning of the word leverage, he said hotly. That he was involved in any way with drug smuggling is ridiculous. Later, the former head of intelligence of Louisiana State Police told us of the folder they had kept on the Copeland brothers, Al and Will, and their suspicions that the explosive growth of that fast food chain had indeed been prompted by secret ingredients, not all of which were spices. We'd already learned enough to permanently label Mr. Wamstead as colorful even before we discovered the Dallas Morning News had printed his claims to being D.B. Cooper's skyjacker extraordinaire who parachuted from an airliner over Washington state with $200,000 and whose real name and fate today remain, almost 30 years later, unknown. The letterhead of Mr. Wamstead's stationery reads, Dale F. Wamstead, F.K.A., formerly known as Del Frisco, now known as N.K.A., now known as D.B. Cooper, Bob Cooper. D.B. Bob Cooper. The Dallas paper reported that this time around he's doing business as Captain Bob Cooper, or D.B. Cooper hybrid persona of an adventurous North Texas trading post pioneer and the skyjacker who absconded with $200,000 by parachuting out over Washington state in 1971. Dale Wamstead, a history buff who made off like a bandit by pocketing the lion's share of the $23 million from the sale of Del Frisco's Double Eagle Steakhouse, says draw your own conclusions. My friends call me Coop, he adds. Our interest in Dale Wamstead was strictly in his possible role in drug money laundering through a corporation he owned, which, though he wasn't in the restaurant business, had been named Trinity Energy. And thanks to Wamstead's participation in what ABC's 2020 called the Great Steak Wars, we finally got some answers. It all started when the famous Ruth's Chris Steakhouse chain was bumped off the list of America's top 10 steakhouses. Both Ruth's Steakhouse and Dale's had flourished in that bastion of seafood in New Orleans until 1985 when Wamstead's wife shot him and Wamstead's restaurant closed. Ruth Fertel, owner of Ruth's Chris, told Wamstead, now ex-wife, by the way, Lena, I got to tell you I'm going to have to give you shooting lessons. Anyone who shoots someone 5 times and doesn't get him needs shooting lessons. This didn't help relations with Wamstead, who left New Orleans to open a Del Frisco's in Dallas. Weeks later, his new restaurant made its debut on the newly created Knife and Forks Club, America's Top 10 Steakhouses, and Ruth's Chris Steakhouse publicly charged its longtime rival with bogus advertising, a charge Wamstead hotly denied. Ruth Fertel began her crusade to expose the annual list as a fraud. It became quite literally a federal case. Fertel, with 42 steakhouses nationwide, contended the list was bought and paid for by her nemesis, Dale Wamstead, owner by then of the Del Frisco's Double Eagle Steakhouse in Dallas, and sued, fighting back. Del Frisco's Double Eagle Steakhouse filed suit as well, accusing Ruth's Chris of misleading advertising, libel, and slander. Prime beef became a tender subject in Dallas. In the sizzling culmination of their ongoing feud, the two steakhouses made ready to grill each other in the state district court. Then the feud really got up close and personal. Ruth Chris's spokesman slammed the Knife and Fork Club, theorizing that its unethical rating system was nothing but a front for Del Frisco's, saying he welcomed the chance to expose Wamstead, the creep in Dallas. According to Ruth's Chris attorney, he forced Wamstead to acknowledge the connection between the restaurant and publicity firm during a deposition. I hammered away at it until I got the answer, he said, of the deposition. It was not a pretty sight. A settlement was reached when Wamstead admitted that his public relations man had dreamed up the list. All my life I had a hard time getting along with myself. Let anybody else, said Wamstead. Though both sides claimed victory, Wamstead's Del Frisco's Double Eagle Steakhouse was crowing louder, noting that they were now almost $23 million richer since the settlement. Wamstead said the libel suit had been holding up the sale of his chain to Lone Star Steakhouse and Saloon Incorporated in Wichita, Kansas. Right after settling its suit against Ruth Chris's Del Frisco's closed the sale to Lone Star, unknown to observers. Wamstead's chain had been owned by Trinity Energy. We now discovered a second Trinity Energy, one that had also sold for the exact same amount, $22 million. And the exact same year, 1995, a SEAL associate, Roy Fugler, reported Trinity Energy sale. Or Trinity Energy sale. Might be a typo. We were befuddled and amazed. We asked ourselves somewhat numbly, what's up with that? During the depositions, the accounting practices of Dale Wamstead's steakhouse chain were revealed for the first time, and they are so unusual that after reviewing them, we were certain we were looking at something only an elite deviant class like the CIA or the mob or both could have dreamt up. Item: the land and building of the chain's headquarters was not owned by the company, but by Mr. Wamstead's wife, Colleen Keating. Item: the restaurant was leased to something called the Irwin J. Grossner Foundation, Incorporated, a nonprofit organization. Mr. Wamstead was president of the foundation, technically the owner of the restaurant, and which held a private club license from the Texas Alcoholic Beverage Commission. Who were the members of the Grossner Foundation? Anyone, it turned out, who had ever purchased an alcoholic beverage at Del Frisco's restaurant. Item: the Grossner Foundation employed 110 people who worked in the restaurant kitchen and dining rooms. Mr. Wamstead received only a salary of $35,000 a year from the foundation. Item: the management contract for Del Frisco's chain was held by an entity called Beefsteak Ltd. Mr. Wamstead owned 99% of the stock in the limited partnership registered with the Texas Secretary of State's office. He said he received 10% of the restaurant's gross revenue and management incentive bonus. Item: Brass Balls Incorporated, of which Wamstead's role of which Wamstad is sole owner, had previously had the management contract for Del Frisco's holding the remaining 1% of stock in Beefsteak Ltd. And was listed as the general partner. Item: Manassia Management Corporation was the advertising agency for the restaurant. Wamstad's wife, Colleen, was the president. In his deposition, Mr. Wamstad said the restaurant transferred $20,000 a month to Manassia to cover its advertising cost. Irwin J. Grossner is just a name he made up, Mr. Wamstad said in a phone interview. It is just like if you have a child. You name it Billy Joe or Marianne, he said. Irwin J. Grossner is the entity in the steakhouse. I was just giving birth to a child. This is, we realized, the elite deviant approaching to following the rule of law. So we just kept digging into Wamstad and his operations. When Wamstad sold Del Frisco's Double Eagle Steakhouse to Lone Star, the Dallas restaurant alone was grossing nearly $1 million a month, and the buying entity Lone Star was itself fabulously profitable, with operating margins among the highest in the industry, averaging 25% before tax and 13.7% net after tax. Compare that to rival Outback Steakhouse, which averages just under 8.1% net after tax. Could laundering drug money help account for such incredible profitability? A too brief look at Lone Star reveals that its chairman, Jamie Coulter, handles all the accounting and administrative functions for this publicly traded company through a private company which he controls. When asked about the unusual agreement, Coulter explained, the reason Coulter Enterprises does administrative and financial services for Lone Star is that no one else can turn around a financial statement in 6 days as cheaply as we can. Sure, this may also be the only steakhouse chain in the known world to have not one, not two, but 3 Learjets. They exist to, the company says, facilitate a mobile staff. Sure. With seats for 850, Wamstad's current steakhouse casts a big shadow in the outsized town of Dallas. Its biggest restaurant in the state of Texas. Atop the restaurant's roof, a 24-carat gold leaf dome glistens, rising 55 feet above the ground as a gilded beacon to his new Three Forks restaurant. Inside, the restaurant boasts a staircase out of Gone with the Wild, while stained glass, handcrafted in France, glows above the foyer. Greeting guests is a former fiddle-playing Miss Texas who has been the marketing director for Caesars Palace Casinos in Las Vegas. The same casino from whom Kentucky Fried Chicken magnate and later Kentucky Governor John Brown bought the Lums chain, the same casino linked to drug money laundering in a major DEA investigation of the drug smuggling Chagra brothers, the same casino owners whose ownership had come under SEC scrutiny for connections to Meyer Lansky and organized crime. Could Dale Wamstad, Baton Rouge millionaire, drug smuggler, Barry Seal, and Arkansas's Bond Daddy, Dan Lassiter, all belong to the same organization? Wamstad and Lassiter were both in thoroughbred horse racing at the same time, we learned. Both had horses run in the Kentucky Derby, and both kept racing stables at infamous Oak Lawn Racetrack in Hot Springs, Arkansas. Wamstad's trainer from Bay Street, Louis, Mississippi, was a man dubbed Jack the Snake. Jack Morile, Jack Morile. In the same year, the Wamstad's estranged ex-wife says Dale had to leave the country. Moriel was convicted of race fixing in Illinois. So what were we looking at here? A steakhouse chain owned by a Trinity Energy, sold to Lone Star Steakhouse during the exact same time in 1995, a and for exactly the same price, $22 million, as the Trinity Energy owned by Barry Seal's smuggling partner Michael Roy Fogler. We had received a tip that Trinity Energy we really wanted had been incorporated in Delaware. Wamstead answered evasively, vaguely, recalling that Trinity Energy was registered in that state. This Delaware Trinity is, in 1992, gobbled up by a company called ICF Kaiser, composed of former Defense Department officials on whose board and whose soon-to-be chairman is former Congressman Tony Coelho. Coelho's numerous distinctions included having been linked in print to drug smuggling organization The Company, while still a congressman from California, being the political protege of the personal lawyer for Seal associate Gene Glick, Democratic National Committee Chairman Charles Manat, and being forced to resign in disgrace from the House of Representatives in 1989 to thwart a growing investigation into his fundraising activities for the Democratic Party. Of course, his most recent claim to fame was Al Gore's campaign chairman. Of course. That's it for today.